The prisoner began speaking in an unknown language just before his death, exposing himself as the devil. The film begins with a police officer running through a windy snow-covered forest, but he starts to gasp for air. Weakly falling to the ground, he seemingly dies. Afterward, a voiceover invites the audience to understand what happened and learn the story in which he nearly died. A few weeks before these events, John Hobbes is a successful Philadelphia police officer who has dedicated his life to catching criminals. A few days ago, he had a surprising day, catching one of the most dangerous serial killers, Edgar Reese, who had murdered 17 people for no apparent reason. Now, police officers, journalists, and lawyers gather for the execution of the unrepentant convict. Lieutenant Stanton congratulates his subordinate, as John has now sent 8 killers to their death. However, the detective is not pleased, as the statistics show that our world is far from ideal and needs what he calls cleaners. Just before the execution, John decides to visit Reese and talk to him. The detective is struck by the convict's behavior, as he doesn't seem to care, doesn't plead for mercy, and shows no remorse. Instead of being in panic, he is upbeat, telling dark jokes. At one point, Reese extends his hand to John and, touching him, starts speaking in an unknown language. The detective doesn't understand what is happening and dismisses it, assuming the convict is speaking in his native Dutch. Before John leaves, Reese gives him a riddle. Why is there a gap between Lyons and Spakowski? Not understanding the question, John leaves. A few minutes later, the sentence is carried out. Before dying, Reese sings the song "Time Is on My Side." That evening, John heads to a bar where he meets his colleagues and friends, Lou and Jonesy. They are struck by John's unwavering devotion to his work, as he seems like an angel in human form, incapable of crossing the line of the law, no matter the circumstances. Lou tries to provoke his friend with sly questions about bribery, but John remains true to himself. He is convinced that their work helps people, and it should be done diligently, no matter the external factors. At the same time, the officer who executed Reese goes to a nightclub. On the way, he runs into a man, who bumps into another. In a series of unpredictable encounters, the last person on the list is Charles Olum, whose behavior undergoes a dramatic change. In the morning, John spends time with his kind-hearted but mentally challenged brother, Art, and his nephew, Sam. Art feels guilty for intruding on his older brother's life, believing that John's marriage ended because of him. The detective reassures him not to worry about it, stating that family is the most important thing to him, and he would never abandon his loved ones in times of need. Meanwhile, Charles is having breakfast in a stranger's apartment and brushing his teeth in the bathroom, with a corpse lying nearby. After following the detective and confirming he's at work, Charles calls John, informing him about a murder and giving the address where the victim is located. John believes it's a cruel joke or a mysterious prank from jealous people who saw the report featuring him, so he sends a patrol unit to the dimly lit crime scene. Soon, they report that it is a real crime scene, and in the bathroom, they find the body of a man with multiple fatal injection marks from poison. A strange number is written on his chest, but no one understands its significance. Based on the clues left in the apartment, it becomes clear that the killer spent the night and had breakfast there, leaving the apartment just minutes before the police arrived. John also finds the riddle that Reese had posed to him. Back at the office, John discusses the new murder with the lieutenant, considering 2 possibilities. It could be the work of an imitator, or Reese had an accomplice they had never known about. Finding it all very strange, John decides to share the riddle Reese gave him with his colleagues. Lou mentions that he knew a colleague named Spakowski, who worked there more than 20 years ago. In fact, his name can still be found on an old honor board now stored in the basement. When they go there, John finds the board, which includes the names of Spakowski and Lyons. They were the best cops of 1964 and 1966, but between their names is a blank mysterious space, as if someone had intentionally erased this person from history. No one remembers who was the best police officer of 1965, so John conducts his own investigation. Digging through the database, he learns that it was Robert Milano, a great cop who died in a cottage due to a mishandling of a firearm. Soon, John and Jonesy start investigating the new murder, which mirrors Reese's style. Believing that the executed convict holds the key to the puzzle, the detectives rewatch his final video. They hear the same strange words again and realize they don't understand the language he's speaking. John decides to visit the late Milano's daughter, Greta, to learn more about her father. She asks a series of odd questions to determine whether the executed convict sang and touched the detective. She then reveals that her father was a good cop, but there was a point when that changed. He once caught a serial killer, but after the killer's execution, the murders continued. Soon, the investigation started suspecting Milano of being an occultist, leading him to take his own life in a secluded cabin in the woods. Before John leaves, Greta asks if he believes in God, but John dismisses it, not thinking much of it. On his way home, he encounters Charles, unaware that he is the killer. At night, John receives a call on his home phone, but no one speaks. He assumes it's just annoying journalists or someone trying to intimidate him, dismissing it as a waste of time. Soon after, Charles becomes the victim of a heavyset man who barges into his apartment with a syringe containing poison. The next morning, the detectives bring in a linguist to help with translating the audio recording. After listening to Reese's speech, the expert hesitates and suggests that it could be an ancient language. Eventually, he manages to translate the text, but its content is incredibly strange. Before his execution, Reese had said that he couldn't penetrate John's body, but would pursue him until he either succeeded or destroyed his life. Shortly after, the heavyset man calls the police station and reports another dead body. Arriving at the crime scene, John notices that the body in the bathroom is of a man he had seen on the street the previous night. Behind the mirror, he finds another riddle, and on Charles's body, there's a mark, a number 2, that doesn't make any logical sense. The detectives rewatch the video recordings, sift through old case files and documents, but everything proves futile. They're at a dead end and have no idea what to do next. A few days later, Jonesy shares the results of the investigation, which shocks John even more. According to the analysis, Charles killed the first victim, after which an unknown person killed him. Continuing to copy Reese's style, John decides to visit Milano's old house, hoping it will help him unravel the mystery behind the series of strange murders. Once inside the decaying building, the detective heads to the dusty basement, where he finds old books describing various biblical terms and phenomena that he doesn't understand. Between the pages, he discovers a photograph of the basement. Comparing the photo to reality, he notices that one of the walls has been repainted. Using water and a solvent, he removes the paint and uncovers an inscription on the wall. Azazel. Back in the city, John decides to talk to Greta, as she is the only one who might explain her late father's behavior and the strange inscription in the basement of their country house. She refuses to explain anything and urges him to drop the case for the sake of his own safety and the lives of his loved ones. However, the detective can't ignore her advice. He's determined to do whatever it takes to ensure that evil gets its just punishment. The lieutenant receives the phone call logs and realizes that the killer had called John from the crime scene. It's assumed that the ruthless maniac is personally provoking the detective and might even be a police officer. John starts reading religious literature and learns that Azazel is an evil spirit, similar to a demon. The Bible mentions Azazel vaguely but states that it's a being capable of passing from person to person through touch. Furthermore, Azazel is extremely dangerous, and anyone who seeks to punish it must conceal their intentions and actions, or the evil spirit will make them suffer. Upon returning home, John senses that someone is watching him. He tries to shake off the stalker, but then notices a shadow and attempts to catch the maniac, but fails. A couple of days later, Azazel finds a way to stalk John. First, he takes the form of a cat, then touches a man who enters the police station. Moving from one person to another through touch, he reaches Lou. During a conversation, a colleague asks John everything he knows about the case, then starts humming Reese's song. This shocks the detective, but it's just the beginning of a series of unsettling nightmares that will send chills down his spine. Azazel continues moving from person to person, eventually leaving the police station. John follows him, trying to figure out which person is hosting the demon. Unafraid of being discovered, Azazel praises the officer for his cleverness and threatens him with violence before fleeing, transferring from one passerby to another. Returning to the station, John asks his colleagues about what happened, but they have no memory of their actions while possessed by the demon. Needing an explanation, John urgently meets with Greta and asks her to tell him everything she knows. The girl admits that Azazel is a fallen angel, cast out by God, who became a demon as a result. Without the right to a physical form, Azazel became a demon capable of possessing people through touch. John has a hard time believing this, as he's a police officer used to working with concrete evidence and criminals. Greta understands his disbelief but suggests that John has been chosen by God as the one who can resist evil. Azazel failed to take control of the detective's body, just as he had with Greta's father. By the end of the conversation, John and Greta agree that Azazel is not all-powerful, meaning he's vulnerable and can be killed. The couple doesn't realize that Azazel has been watching them all along and overheard most of their conversation. As soon as John leaves, the demon begins to stalk the girl. She notices a man following her and tries to escape, but it's in vain. Azazel frightens Greta, but he avoids touching her so that she'll remember their conversation and pass it on to John. At some point, Greta decides to run, and Azazel chases her, moving from one body to another. Eventually, the girl manages to get into a taxi, which quickly drives off. Realizing that Azazel is a fallen angel who angered God, Greta hides in a church, the only place where the demon cannot enter. Soon, John arrives to support her during this difficult moment and promises to do everything he can to stop Azazel. The next morning, the lieutenant tells John that he no longer trusts him, suspecting that he might somehow be involved in the crimes. Too many strange coincidences lead the chief to believe that his best detective is the same maniac mimicking Reese's style. With no evidence to prove this, the lieutenant asks John to step away from the case and take some time off. When John returns home, he finds his mentally impaired brother beaten. Art admits that his own son struck him. John realizes that his nephew was possessed by the demon and tries to talk to him. Tracking Azazel, the detective follows him in the body of a teenage girl, only for the demon to move into the body of a school teacher. Trying to provoke John, Azazel threatens him and forces the officer to shoot him in front of a group of passersby. Moving into one of the witnesses to the shooting, Azazel boasts that when his host dies, he gains the ability to move on to another, even without touching them. Soon, the police arrive at the scene. The lieutenant becomes even more suspicious of John, as his fingerprints are found at one of the murder scenes. Moreover, the school teacher had a revolver with blanks, yet he was shot in the heart. The strange circumstances turn John into the main suspect in all the murders, prompting the chief to remove him from the investigation. Returning to the station, John hands in his badge and gun and learns that the department is considering arresting him to calm the public, angered by the murder of the teacher in broad daylight. After reaching out to Greta, John realizes that the strange markings found on the victims' bodies are messages left by Azazel. They reference holy scriptures and foretell an imminent apocalypse, where humanity will be wiped out, and demons will take over the earth, freely roaming its streets. As they continue their research, reading through hundreds of books, Greta and John uncover more about Azazel. They learn that if a demon is exorcised from its host, it can only travel for one breath and no farther than 500 cubits. If it doesn't find a new host, the demon will die. The next morning, Sam tells John that he woke him up in the middle of the night while trying to adjust his blanket. Realizing he wasn't in his nephew's room, John checks the house. He finds an open bathroom window and strange symbols on the mirror. Upon inspecting Sam, John discovers a demon's mark on his body. Understanding that Azazel had been in the house the night before, he rushes to his brother's place, only to arrive too late. The demon has already killed Art with a fatal injection, and this is only the beginning of the horror. Azazel possesses several witnesses, forcing them to lie and claim that the officer fired first, killing an innocent person. As the chaos unfolds, Jonesy calls his friend, telling him that a few colleagues are coming to arrest him. Jonesy is the last person to believe in John's innocence, so he commits a crime to help him escape. Sam and John flee through a window, realizing that Azazel is still watching their every move. In their flight from the authorities, they take refuge in the subway, but even there, a police officer recognizes them. After knocking him out, John and Sam seek shelter in the underground labyrinths, where the homeless reside. It's here that John decides to tell Sam about his father, though Sam already suspects that Art is dead. Later that evening, John seeks refuge with Greta, knowing she's the only one who can help him hide. As they continue their research, John realizes he's the only one who can stop Azazel. Accepting his fate, he says goodbye to Sam and Greta, asking them to take care of each other. John then heads to Milano's cabin, calling Jonesy, fully aware that his call will be traced and that he will be found and arrested. Once in the forest, John discards his car keys to prevent Azazel from using his vehicle to escape when he arrives. That night, John notices someone approaching and suspects it's the demon. At first, he encounters a lieutenant, assuming he's possessed, but then realizes Jonesy has arrived with him. They want to arrest John and ask him to drop his weapon to avoid shooting. The detective knows that someone is possessed, but he's torn, afraid of shooting and killing an innocent person. When he reluctantly drops his weapon, the possessed Jonesy kills the captain. Azazel is ready to shoot his host to free himself and possess the nearest body. John stops him, leading to a brutal fight. During the struggle, a gunshot rings out, and Jonesy is wounded in the stomach. Slowly dying, John seizes the opportunity to confront Azazel. Lighting a cigarette laced with the same poison the demon used earlier, John reveals his plan. He had lured the demon into a trap, knowing he was the only one for miles around. John poisons himself, ready for Azazel to take over his body, knowing they both face death. After killing Jonesy, the detective becomes possessed. Azazel tries to flee, but collapses, choking. It appears both of them die from the poison, and everything ends, except it doesn't. The demon inhabits the body of a nearby cat, calmly leaving the cabin and heading back to the city. The film depicts the demon Azazel switching bodies like gloves and continuing to spread chaos. Is it worth battling an immortal enemy, knowing victory is impossible? Or is simply resisting enough to be considered a victory? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give us a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.